Hey guys, and welcome back. My name's Ohaple, and today we've got a fun video for you. This is going to be the Titanfall story summary. So a lot of people's main complaint with Titanfall so far has been that the campaign doesn't adequately explain the story. You're just given little snippets of information while you're trying to play a multiplayer game, and it makes it so most of us just miss the actual important parts of the story and what's actually happening. So I'm just going to briefly overview the story so that you guys understand it a little bit better. The game that you're playing takes place on the Frontier. You can think of the Frontier kind of as like the Wild West of the explored space in Titanfall. In Titanfall, you will be assigned to one of two factions, either the IMC or the Militia. And the Militia, you can think of as kind of the homesteaders. They're the ones that have moved out here. This is where they work. This is their home. This is where their families are. They're kind of just like rebels. They're kind of a ragtag group, but this is their home. The IMC, on the other hand, are what Hammond Engineering has grown into. Hammond Engineering is who created the Titans and the Spectres and all those kind of robots that you see in the game. Now, the problem is they needed more resources to continue building up their little engineering empire. They need more resources for their Titans and for their Spectres and all that. So they've learned that the Frontier has a lot of the resources and fuel that they need in order to continue their commercial expansion. So they're coming out into the Frontier and trying to take what has been the Militia's land. The Titanfall story does a really good job. You play the same campaign from both sides, and what it does is it makes it so that it's kind of morally nebulous all the time. When you're fighting on the IMC side, are you just a hired gun doing these immoral acts? Like, what's really the motivation here? And when you're playing on the Militia side, well, is what we're doing really moral? Are we being justified in this? There's not a real hero in the Titanfall campaign, though it does seem that out of the people I've talked to, a lot more people seem to emotionally identify with the Militia than with the IMC. The story kicks off in a mission called Refueling Raid. In this, the Militia are coming in to an IMC kind of fuel depot, and they're trying to take fuel from the IMC because the Militia are kind of hurting for fuel. During this mission, you get a distress call from a guy, McAllen, and he is ex-IMC. He used to work for the IMC, but apparently he led a mutiny, and now he's on the IMC's most wanted. So he's kind of talking to the Militia, saying, hey, I need you guys' help. Now, both sides obviously picked up this distress call, and they managed to track it to this place, the Colony. And on the Colony, this is just one of those little homesteader settlements, and they come in, both the IMC and the Militia, and they're going to fight it out looking for McAllen, because the Militia want to get their hands on McAllen because they think that he can help them take down the IMC with his inside knowledge. The IMC, on the other hand, want to get their hands on him because he's obviously a fugitive, he's on their most wanted, they want to take him down, as well as pursue the Militia and kind of cut off the threat there. It is noted in the game as well that the colonists in this map and in this area, we want nothing to do with this. This isn't our fight. We're just here living our lives. We don't want you guys to be here destroying our lives, destroying our livelihood. So this is one of those areas where you kind of see both sides stepping on some toes, and it kind of makes you feel worse for the citizens of the colony than either team. Kind of continuing this little game of cat and mouse, the Militia do get their hands on McAllen. McAllen joins up with them, and now they're going to go to this IMC vessel that has crashed, which is the Odyssey. This is the vessel that McAllen led the mutiny on, and it ended up crashing. The Militia want to go there to kind of salvage some supplies and get some more stuff that they can use to help them fight the IMC. The IMC are just following them along, trying to get their hands on them, trying to shut down the threat. Now, the Militia and the IMC both get mostly what they want out of this little supply raid, even though it doesn't really matter who wins, they both get away with some supplies. But now they're looking for a guy named Barker. Barker is needed by the Militia in order to use the supplies and the fuel that they've got in order to actually take it back to the IMC and lead an offensive against them. McAllen and Barker used to know each other, but now, just like McAllen, Barker is kind of retired. He's hanging out in Angel City, and he's kind of turned into this really drunk guy. He's just drunk all the time. When you hear he's kind of some comedic relief when you hear him come over the comm, because he's always talking about how you took my whiskey from me and stuff like that. So the Militia heads with McAllen to go to Angel City and pick up Barker. Now they've got their supplies, they've got their fuel, they've got McAllen, and they're trying to get Barker so they can compile their entire plan together. Just like all the other missions, the IMC is following along, trying to shut down this threat. The IMC is starting to see the militia really as a terrorist group. They're coming into all these areas and just destroying stuff. So from the IMC's perspective, these are a bunch of terrorists that need stopped. From the militia's perspective, the IMC is this cold, heartless corporation that's coming in and trying to take our homes. Now, as a result of the battle that happened at Angel City when they were picking up Barker, the militia managed to damage another IMC ship, the Sentinel. And now while the Sentinel is going back to the IMC dock to kind of get repairs done on it and everything like that, the militia sees this as an opportunity to lead a second strike on the Sentinel to take it out for good while it's in its kind of weak state, while it's sitting stationary at a dock. The militia are successful and they manage to take the Sentinel out. So now the IMC has lost one of their big ships. The Sentinel is completely out of the fight. Now that the militia have gotten their fuel, their supplies, Barker and McAllen, and taken out the Sentinel, they decide to continue their plan. And now we see what their plan is to reverse engineer this thing called the Repulsor. You see the dragons that are on the map Boneyard? Those are these awful dragons that can just tear stuff up, but the IMC has this technology, this Repulsor technology, and that's what was being used on the map Boneyard before it got kind of malfunctioned and shut down. So this Repulsor technology keeps the dragons away from the settlements. The plan is for the militia to go in and reverse engineer this technology so that they can then use it against the IMC at one of their other bases. The trend continues and the IMC follow them to Boneyard. They try to shut them down, try to keep them from getting their hands on this technology, but like the previous missions, the IMC fails and the militia gets that technology. This leads us to the Three Towers mission. The Three Towers mission is where the IMC are trying to defend from the militia coming in and disabling this Repulsor technology. The militia says, hey, we can go into Three Towers, we can disable the Repulsor, and that'll make it so that these dragons just overrun the place, and we don't even have to fight the IMC. The dragons will do it for us. So that's the plan there. The IMC is trying their hardest to defend it, but the militia just managed to disable the Repulsor and win that battle. The whole purpose of taking the Three Towers was because that's kind of a gateway to Demeter. And now Demeter is a huge refueling base for the IMC. They need that base in order to refuel their ships on the way to the edge of the frontier where the militia are kind of holed up. So now the militia are headed to Demeter. They want to overload the reactor there, and that'll completely take out that refueling station, which then makes it so the IMC are kind of trapped to their part of space, and the IMC can't send more forces to come fight the militia on the frontier. So while they're here, McAllen is going to go overload the reactor. He ends up in the reactor with an IMC guy named Blisk. They're trying to fight over it. They're trying to duke it out. They can't fire their firearms because that'll make it explode for sure. So they're trying to do it in kind of a fist fight way. They're talking it out, that kind of stuff. But it does end up that McAllen is successful. While he overloads the reactor, he also talks to a vice admiral of the IMC named Graves. It turns out that Graves, this higher up guy in the IMC, is actually the one that told McAllen to lead this mutiny. So now we have kind of this controversy here where there's kind of a double crosser within the IMC, and maybe McAllen isn't the traitor that the IMC thought he once was. McAllen manages to convince Graves to join the militia's side because, the IMC is so evil and everything. But what ends up happening is the reactor's already destabilized, it explodes, takes them all out. Once again, this battle is won by the militia. They manage to take out the reactor, destroying their fuel base, and Graves, the kind of traitor of the IMC, decides to join up with the militia forces. He takes some Spectres with him, takes his information of the IMC and where all their Spectre bases are. Now that the militia have dealt that crippling blow to the IMC, they don't have their fuel base anymore, they don't have their vice admiral, and they can't send ships out to the frontier to fight, the militia decide to take their last strike, which is going to be against the Spectre production facilities. The Spectres are the only forces the IMC really has anymore out on the frontier, so if they can take out the production of the Spectres, then there will be very little resistance against the militia on the frontier. Now that Graves has left the IMC is kind of without a leader, so Spyglass steps in. Spyglass is their kind of main computer, I guess you can think of it that way. It handles all their technical stuff. You can think of it as kind of just this AI being. It's usually embodied by a modified Spectre robot, but it's much bigger than that. If the Spectre robot that it's in dies, it's not like Spyglass dies. Spyglass is much bigger than that, and Spyglass is now leading the IMC. Now that the IMC has been crippled, Graves decides to try to negotiate with Blisk, who is with the IMC still. So Graves is negotiating with Blisk, saying, we want this war to be over. This should not be you versus me, militia versus IMC. We just need to end this. This is silliness. And now he has kind of some bargaining power because they've crippled the IMC so badly. Blisk basically laughs in his face at this point and says, like, no, this is personal. How are we supposed to know who the better man is if we don't settle this through war? So Blisk denies his kind of peace treaty that's been extended and says, we're going to finish this. And this is pretty much where the story ends. The militia does succeed in taking out some of these Spectre production facilities, and the IMC can't really send more forces out, but we don't really know what happens past that. We know that the Spyglass and Blisk might still be trying to go against the militia. Maybe they're coming up for a second wind. Maybe the militia are going to go on the offensive on the IMC's home front. I think this is what's going to be continued on in the next Titanfall game. But you do leave with this kind of like moral dilemma in your head, because unlike most games where it's very clear that you're playing the hero and all that, in this one you're playing both sides of the story, and you find out that while you're playing the IMC, well, we were going to go out here and take your guys' resources, and now the militia has just come after them looking for blood, and the militia are doing all sorts of these heinous things to get back at the IMC and defend themselves. While at the same time, the militia feel like they're in the right as well because they're defending their homeland, and they feel like if they don't permanently cripple the IMC, then they're just going to be fighting for their lives all the time. So it's really an interesting kind of commentary on war in general. I thought it was fun to play through. Again, the story is not very good while you play it, but it's actually a very compelling story when you actually hear it. So I thought this video would be nice for you guys to just sit through, have a little story time, get to sit back and listen, and now next time you play, you can understand what's really happening through the battles that you are playing. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to like, favorite, and subscribe if you did, and I will talk to you guys later.